This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Something happened as I grew up a little bit, and my heroes growing up used to mostly kind of sort of play Mesa Boogie Marshall amplifiers. As I kind of aged a bit and found new music, one of the things that started to happen was that I started to see the Fender badge on the amps of many of my favourite players, and especially in the jazz world, whether it's someone like Jonathan Kreisberg, Elad Hexelman, Julian Large, these players are, using Fender amplifiers a lot of the time. As well, one of my favourite players, Eric Johnson, for his clean tones has been an advocate of Fender amplifiers for basically the whole of his career. If you're watching this video and you're a fan of either Jazz or Eric Johnson, then you could check out TrueFire. Using the code JNC40 you can get 40% off of any of their courses. Eric Johnson has a course on there where he specifically does break down his signal chain and stuff if you're looking into that sort of stuff. As well as having really great kind of up-close footage of his hands in a way that most other instructional stuff that I've seen or videos that I've seen of Eric, you never really get the kind of really close-up level detail that you get with the TrueFire course. There's also great stuff from Tim Lurch on there if you're into the jazz side of things. Tim Miller if you're looking for some kind of new ways to kind of think about arpeggios and stuff like that. Loads of great stuff. If you're interested in getting like the full gamut and experiencing kind of the breadth of the TrueFire catalog, you can use the code JNC100 to get $100 off of All Access Pass, which is basically like your yearly access to it, something like a Netflix subscription or something like that. So yes, JNC40 for any individual course, whether you're looking at Andy Timmons, Eric Johnson, whoever on there. and then JNC 100 if you want to get $100 off of their all access pass. On with the video. Fender. I used to sort of have this opinion about Fender amps, and you'd see online that people would talk about, things compared to a Fender clean amp. I've pretty much looked at amplifiers through like the lens of a Mesa Boogie, and people would compare their Mesa Boogie cleans to the Fenders, and in most things that I read kind of said that the Mesa stuff kind of worked just as well as, maybe better in some examples. Basically, my history with amps is not a long and not a storied one, but it has some little twists. So I wanted to do a video just talking about how I arrived at the situation now where I think a Fender amplifier would be one of my top choices, basically. So I started off on a Marshall or Park by Marshall little practice amp, like a 10 watt type thing, and soon-ish after that I got a Crate GX65. I think I was looking at the time in Manson's to buy some sort of bigger Marshall, most likely, and I think I then compared it to the Crate, and for whatever reason at the time I preferred the sound of the Crate, how something like a 10-year-old mind works, or 11. And the next amp that I bought after that was a Marshall AVT 150 head and cab, a 4x12. I think that's the only 4x12 I ever owned. And that was a channel switching amplifier, so I'd do my acoustic, it had an acoustic sim on it, clean, and then 2 drive channels. That I used for a long, well, I say long time, actually looking back it's not that long. And then I think around the time of 16, 17, I bought a Mesa Boogie Nomad 45. That's basically what I had and used for most of, my university career. I would use that with 4-cable method with a Pod HD 500X, before that a Pod XT Live, and that amp I actually did some fairly big gigs with as well. I can't remember, I did a fairly big gig somewhere with it, some decent-ish gigs with the band that I was in at the time, Ceasefire, played Thekla and stuff like that, supporting Idols actually, who now have a #1 album, which is kind of incredible. But anyway, after uni basically was when I can remember my first experience actually plugging into a Fender amplifier. It took a while to get to this stage, and I think it was a Silverface that was in a little practice room in London, that my buddy Isaac, who's a drummer, we met up after uni and I was just playing, and I plugged straight into this clean little Princeton Reverb Silverface, and I was kind of like just really enjoying it. And you maybe these days, if you're watching this video, you're already a fan of Fender amps probably, but what I loved about it was the big kind of splashy reverb, but also the bell like clean tone to it, and just every note kind of pops out with a Fender amplifier, right? It's kind of, you hear this about other amplifiers where they talk about them being very revealing and stuff. I don't think there's much more revealing than a Fender clean, would be kind of my take on it. So that was my first experience playing it, and that was the first time maybe that I'd just plugged straight back into an amp for a long time with no pedals, just a guitar into an amp, and I just had a great time with that. And that had lived in the back of my mind for a while. I did buy a Princeton Reverb just to check it out on the channel, and I really liked the cleans on that, but I didn't love the way it took pedals. I think that had one of the Jensen speakers in it. I bought a little vintage Silverface Champ, which sounds amazing recorded, and because I was sort of downsizing and moving house, I did sell that one, but that was a really cool little amplifier as well. And what else? I tried the little Tweed Fender Champ. That's got a really cool sound to it as well, the reissue thing. Recently I tried Jake's Fender Pro Reverb Silverface reissue, and again I compared that to a 2-Rock Classic Reverb Signature, and I think, let's be honest, that Fender sounds in many cases like just as good in many ways, right? The Fender Clean, I think, is pretty much unrivaled for me personally. Now I do have a Fender amp here, Pro Reverb. This is a vintage 1965 thing, which costs me money regularly because for some reason it likes to make crackly noises. But yeah, what essentially I've found is that there is nothing for me, no amplifier that I've plugged into that I get as much of that visceral feeling of actually plugging into an amp, having a lovely reverb there available, and that also I think a Fender, if you pair it with the right speaker, is the perfect pedal platform as well. The only thing is that well, you have to find the right Fender amp that works for the volumes that you're playing at. So whether that is a Champ, whether that's a Princeton, a deluxe reverb, you keep going up until eventually you get to a twin, which would be if you really, really need to stay super clean. But for me, you're just going to get a bit of like room sound. But I never got as much out of just plugging into an amplifier with just a clean. I never got as much of a gratifying feeling as you get plugging into a Fender. Now this is obviously going to be making some noise. So what have I got going on settings wise there? I've got the treble at 3.5, the bass at 4.5, and the volume at 3. I think the thing is that you've got relatively limited options in terms of tweaking a sweet spot, but if you just choose the amp that is going to be in your sweet spot, I think that's the way to go. And you think, right, well, I normally like things a bit more cranked, then you go for a lower wattage one. If you like things to stay clean with cleaner headroom, something like the Pro Reverb or the Twin might be the way to go. The other thing about the Fender stuff is that I was used to playing Mesa Boogie amps, which they kind of have a reverb which is kind of, when it's all the way up, most of them, kind of not really there, like the Mark Series amps. It's like you turn the reverb up full and you don't get this kind of beautiful splashy thing, which is a bit of a thing that some people really don't like about Fenders, but for me, you know, paired with a single coil guitar, just a guitar, you know, plugged straight in, with that lovely kind of tank reverb that most Fenders, I think, do really nicely. That, for me, is kind of why I've sort of moved away from the idea of a multi-channel amp, because I felt like the Fender Clean, to me, is like the best sounding clean that, or best experience of playing straight into a clean. I do really need actual clean tones that I don't so much mind that there's not necessarily a drive kind of channel going on here, because the experience, I think, if I'm playing with this amp, would be that I'd use pedals to kind of stack and get the gain stuff that I need, which of course, when you have a Fender amp with the right sort of speaker for you, so for me that is, this has got EV M12 speakers in it, or I think that something maybe like a something not paper or Alnico, I guess, would be the thing that works best for me, because I think they kind of roll off a bit more smoothly. Yeah, I just think the Fender amp, now that I'm, you know, experiencing it properly, I think would be the way that I would be super happy to go. And yeah, as I say, you just find the Fender amp that is going to work in your specific situation. You know, if you're always playing at home, maybe a Champ. If you're playing at home and then sometimes, you know, you need a stage volume type amp, maybe a Princeton Reverb. Maybe you go higher up to a deluxe reverb if it's a slightly bigger venue. I think I really like that kind of aspect of like the way that Fender amps have been designed over the years. I think there's a certain simplicity to it and a certain beauty to it. And I don't think you can argue with the tones. I think they sound incredible. So let me know if you've got a favourite Fender amp that you would recommend to people that are looking for that sound. You know, whatever the Fender amp sound is. But for me, it's that really kind of in the room, like a huge, bright, but also balanced, kind of clean tone. It's actually got a bit more bass as well than the Two Rock Classic Reverb Signature. I found, partly probably because this is a 2x12 cab. But I just think it's a fantastic sound in general. To me, it's like the perfect clean sound. I don't know if you feel the same, but let me know if you do in the comments below. And as I say, if you've got alternatives, like of course there are like boutique builders that just build straight up Fender clones, and I think that's probably a way to get a really, really well made amp that sounds like these sorts of things. And I think that would be like whether it's Rift amps in the UK or, you know, whoever your favourite kind of builder, feel free to shout them out below as well. But I think the Fender circuits to me are something quite special, and this Pro Reverb seems to me to sit in that sweet spot for me, I think, where kind of, I think it's about 40 watts, something like that, where on 3, like it's probably about kind of gig volume, and it's in that sweet spot where it's still clean, but pushing a tiny bit. I really love the sound from that pedal show of them absolutely cranking a deluxe reverb. So I want to try that at some point. I think that'd still be too loud for me. So maybe like cranking a Princeton reverb might be the thing that I could do, or even a Champ, I guess. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.